So this watch is described by Addies Dive as the 3D sand effect textured dial, which isn't a particularly great name for the watch, which is why I think most of us are describing this one as the Addies Dive Sand Dune. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches, and I'm talking about another watch from Addies Dive. Now, I owned a couple of Addies Dive watches a few years ago, and I found them to be really good, certainly affordable, and I was really impressed by them, but they certainly were lacking a little bit because they were a more affordable watch. I sort of gave them credit for what they did, and I enjoyed them, but they were an affordable watch. This watch, this Sand Dune, however, doesn't feel like those watches from a few years ago. It's priced the same as those watches a few years ago, but it feels so much better. The quality of Addies Dive watches seems to be increasing. A lot of the watches coming out of China, a lot of the watches that are available on Aliexpress also seem to be going up in quality. And it's nice to see that Addies Dive is doing this too and keeping the price low. This one here, if you are interested in buying it, is 130 Australian dollars. And this is a lot of watch for 130 Australian dollars. Now, I was very lucky that Addies Dive reached out to me and said, hey, are there any of our watches that you are interested in? Because if there is, we'd like to give you a discount. And I said, well, yes, there's one. There's this Sand Dune, which has always been on my wish list. And hey, if I can buy it at a discount, I'm going to take them up on that offer, which is exactly why you would have seen that sponsored icon pop up there, because I did pay for this watch, but they were nice enough to give me a discount for it. And of course, I am going to leave some links directly to the website or directly to the Aliexpress store so that you can purchase this one yourself if you choose to use those links. But now I want to show you this watch because it's not perfect. There are some things that I think they could improve on, but what still surprises me about it is just how good it is, especially for 130 Australian dollars. So let's check it out. Now this Addies Dive AD2059 has been on my wish list for a long time. Partly because it has a Seiko NH35, partly because it is a 39mm case diameter, partly because it has a sapphire crystal, partly because it has 100 meters of water resistance, but mostly and realistically, it's because of that dial. And that dial is even better in person than in pictures because it does have a 3D effect to it and it does have a sand texture to it. And those two sort of 3D effects work really well together, really making this one a Sand Dune. I really like it. And it works really well with some of the other elements that are on the dial too, because you'll see the name itself of Addies Dive and the minute markers that are in black are actually raised slightly because obviously this is a molded dial, so you get a little bit of texture that way too. And what I do like about that sort of texture to it, or that molding, is it's done really well. I've had two types of molded dials before in watches. Ones that work really well and others that don't work very well. This one, it works very well, and then it looks really nice with those applied polished markers and those nice long polished hands. The date window is also polished steel with a white calendar wheel in there. Now there's no lume shot today because there's no lume on this watch. So this watch has a case of 38.8mm, it has a lug to lug of 47.8mm, it has a lug width of 20mm. That bracelet also has a heap of taper down to the clasp, down to 15.8mm. But it's the thickness of this watch that I think is going to be a little bit of a concern for people. And it really is one of the only features of this watch that is a real concern because it's 13.5mm, which is not huge, but perhaps for this style of watch, it feels a little bit thick. Now I don't normally measure crowns, but I wanted to with this one because this one is 5.4mm and it feels a little bit small. It feels a little bit small when you're grabbing onto it and unscrewing it. It feels a little bit small when you're manually winding that movement. It feels a little bit small when you're then actioning it. Now this watch contains the Seiko NH35, so you'll see that it has hacking. And of course, as I just showed you, it also has hand winding. Now I always really appreciate seeing different Seiko movements on my time grapher to get an understanding of how they're performing, and I generally get really good performance out of them. Let's see how this one's doing. Well, as I've come to expect from Seiko movements, this one's running really well. 21,600 vibrations per hour, 0 beat error, reasonable amplitude, and running a little bit fast. It has been running about sort of +2 to +6 seconds a day. So it's really easy to see that sand dune dial because it's covered by a nice piece of flat sapphire crystal. Yep, comes up as sapphire. It's surrounded by a polished solid bezel, then with brushing on the tops of the lugs, polishing on the sides, and as you can see just looking there, it is a little bit chubby. And that doesn't include really the sapphire crystal because it is flat. So it is pretty much one of the negatives of this particular watch. The bracelets on Addies dives, however, have been getting really good. This is a Jubilee style watch, so it does have a little bit of movement, which makes it nice and comfortable. Has solid end links, brushing down the sides, polishing through the center, polishing on the side. They use split pins to change out the bracelet, and it has one of these sort of what I think is the sort of smaller versions of the Addies dive clasps, which has plenty of micro adjust, double pushers, and all milled interior. This reminds me a little bit of an Oris clasp. It has that sort of feel, look, and size to it. Also then listed there with the Addies dive logo, and then it has the sort of typical Addies dive case back there too. So I think it does actually sit quite nicely on my 17cm wrist. That Jubilee bracelet is very comfortable, actually feels quite nice. The dimensions are quite good, except when you look this way, because it does feel a little bit top heavy. And when I say top heavy, I only mean a little bit. It is a little bit chunky, and that is probably one of my only dislikes about this watch, because there are lots of things I do like about it. And what do I actually like about this? What don't I like, and what would I change? Well, that dial, it really grabs my attention and I love it. The bracelet has actually really impressed me. I wish this was on a lot of other watches, and I like that clasp too. This watch really, for me, only has two negatives. The thickness of the watch, which doesn't stop me wanting to wear it, but it does limit the sort of time that I want it on wrist, because you can slightly feel it. It's not so much that it feels uncomfortable, but it feels slightly wrong. And that crown just feels a little bit small. It actually looks quite good, but when you actually go to action it, it feels a little bit small. But this watch has a huge amount of redeeming features, many more positives than those two negatives, because the dial is absolutely brilliant. The overall presentation of the watch, the bracelet, the performance of that movement and the movement choice is very good, and the price is excellent. I can see why this watch in its different variations has been so popular. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Maybe check out a couple of my other videos next.